Now I've got you.
Good evening for those watching, and I hope you had a wonderful Christmas. Today I will be producing another episode in this character analysis series I'm working on. This one once again focusing on Ryne as promised. In the first part we went over just the general idea of what Ryne adds to the story of Shadowbringers, the parenting figures that psychologically affected her growing up, Thancred's internal conflict of having to face his past with Minfilia, among other observations I made along the way. If you're interested, feel free to check out that video before watching this one. I ended the first part on the scene where Thancred defeats Ranjit and has finally confronted and overcome his past trauma and can now finally move on and be that good kind of parenting figure to Ryne. It's also just before a lot of cool stuff happens in regards to both characters, plus there's some nice payoffs. But the reason I ended the video there is because now we have to tackle two important questions, those being: 1. Should Thancred have died there? And 2. Instead of the Warrior of Light, should Thancred have been the one who gets to kill off Ranjit instead? The second question is a lot easier to tackle, so I will go over the former first. Should he have died? By the way, as a little forewarning, this is going to be off rails for a bit, so it's going to take a while till we get on to tackling the actual video. Now, to get the full picture, we need to talk about character deaths in general from a writing perspective. So sorry for going a bit off course, I just feel that it's an important thing to discuss before we head further on into the video. A big reason you want to kill off your characters as a writer is for tension. This tension comes from the feeling of consequences having impact. Note that the consequence doesn't always have to be death. However, it's the easiest thing to get across, since dying is easily understood by everyone, and it's, irreversible, or at least should be. Anyway, a writer whose characters face real consequences will have tension in scenes they want to have tension in, because the reader is always wary of whether or not the characters that they root for will make it out of the ordeal unscathed, or if they will face consequences. A writer who regularly has characters surviving seemingly hard or impossible to survive scenarios with no real explanations other than writer convenience and plot armor will on the other hand remove tension, since the reader becomes accustomed to seeing characters survive anything, and only the bad guys face real consequences. If there's anything I have noticed while playing JRPGs my entire life is that Japanese writers love fake out deaths. Like, really love fake out deaths. It has become basically a part of the checklist for when playing JRPGs. This is of course effective from a writer's perspective, as you get to basically have the cake and eat it. You create tension, you subvert the reader's expectations, and you get the reaction that you want out of the reader, while also getting to keep the character alive, while also gaining a positive reaction from the reader when they see that their favorite characters have returned. But human beings are very capable of adapting to their surroundings, and this applies to storytelling as well, since if you over-rely on these fake-out deaths, or characters surviving with plot armor, then the reader will simply start seeing the pattern and come to expect that happening. This pattern recognition can of course be broken, even to great effect, if it's used in a way to emphasize that a specific character did face real consequence. But generally speaking, it's hard to get the reader to feel tension again if this sort of pattern happens regularly. Though, once again, as with all things, it's more complicated than this, such as how constantly killing off characters too early can have a negative effect as well, since there's no payoff, or how the characters are handled prior to them facing consequences, as characters that the readers aren't attached to will invoke basically no reaction, or killing off a blatantly evil antagonist serves more as a win for the main character rather than create tension, yada yada yada. But I am just trying to stick to what context is relevant for the video, so let's talk about how this applies into FF14 specifically. Now, Part of the reason why the 3.3 story conclusion to Heavensward was so epic was because the stakes were really high. We really couldn't tell whether or not Estinian would survive this entire ordeal, and there was genuine tension after the first fight with Nidhogg due to this. This is because characters from A Realm Reborn through Heavensward faced real consequences. There was a common notion that any character could face consequences in this setting. That's why the conclusion to Heavensward's story with 3.3 worked, because a character we became really invested in was under very real danger, hence we were attached and we were on the edge of our seats to see the outcome. So what's changed between then and now? Well, I'd say that Stormblood happened.
Farewell, my first friend. My enemy.
The Black Wolf.
An entire expansion having these sorts of moments changed our perception. And so, when we played the Shadowbringer story, we were accustomed to this pattern that characters will make it out alive just fine. Another thing to consider is tone. Character deaths should be used as a tool to set up the tone you want for your story. And once again, it's more about quality than quantity. No one is going to care if some side characters get off. But if, for example, a very likable character dies in the second or third act, that will usually make people think of that particular story as tragic, or dark, or you know whatnot. Hence my comment about tone. So when we talk about Thancred, could his death scene be used as a way to shift the tone of Shadowbringers? There can definitely be a lot of opinions about this, but I personally don't think so. Shadowbringers already sets up a pretty dark tone, and we see this through a lot of other characters, such as Artbird, Gratia, Imacuttlefish, and so on, with the story as a whole in Northrend. The uncertainty of what will happen to the Scions, and yes, Thancred's and Ryne's story is pretty dark as well, as I have discussed in this video. Their story arc is based on very grim and real psychological effects that lead them to struggle a lot. So I am basically saying that killing off Thancred and or Ryne would not really serve any purpose as far as setting a tone. And now we finally reach the crux of the original question: should they have killed Thancred here? From a writer's perspective, the pros and cons of this are obvious. If you would kill Thancred here, it would not only break the status quo of the reader expecting characters to survive, but it would also really shock the audience. It could also potentially be used as a sort of development to Ryne, and it would make the confrontation against Ranjit feel a lot more personal and more impactful. However, the other side of this argument is that Ryne's and Thancred's story was only just beginning, just because their main conflicts from 5.0 were starting to become resolved. does not mean that the characters themselves are complete. Realistic human relations just don't work that way. But even from a strict writing perspective, both of their initial character arcs were only halfway complete regardless. There was still a lot more story to tell between them. Seeing Thancred become a better parent to her, them grow together and learning to trust each other, both of them also having to cope with the eventual event of Thancred having to depart to the source, and so on. Furthermore, Thancred dying there would be devastating for Ryne's character, and it would put the writers in a pinch. If she grows stronger from the ordeal, then that is a bit unrealistic unless handled carefully. And if she regressed as a character even further back into what she was at the beginning, then that does not leave a very engaging story for the audience. There is also the fact that Thancred was our only real connection to this newly introduced character, who at this point is essentially just a random girl who carries the mantle of Minfilia. Without the connection to Thancred, she would become just a minor background character with no investment. Lastly, it would have been completely unnecessary. His death would not impact the plot moving forward, nor would it serve much when it comes to their relationship. Ryne was already towards the path of overcoming her inability to make her own choices, as shown by her resolve to go meet Minfilia. Likewise, Thancred dying as he did one last great thing as a parent would also ring hollow, because he was already on the path towards becoming a better parent when he overcame his internal conflict and allowed Ryne to see her own resolve through. Regardless of which way you feel, we just have to accept the writer's decision and respect it. So let's talk about how the scene was handled. Some people had problems with how clickbaity it felt, for the lack of a better term. If you aren't going to kill a character, then why create fake tension? Well, as I mentioned previously, Japanese writers just love doing that. It's something that I personally never managed to fully grasp either, but it is what it is, I suppose. Personally, my theory is that I think there was a rift between the writing team and the people responsible for the actual cutscene that was added into the game. I like to think that Thancred dying here was meant to be metaphorical more than anything. As I established in my previous video, Thancred's story heavily utilizes certain metaphors, so it would be consistent if it was being done here as well. Essentially, we see his past himself die and fade away, and then the next time we see him, he has become a better person. I think that was the intention they were going for. It's just possible that the people responsible for the cutscene maybe went a bit overboard, and hence it seemed like they tried to bait emotion out of you in a kind of a ham-fisted sort of way. This is just my own take on it. Regardless what you think about him dying or surviving, or if this scene was too baity, it's important to at least understand the character, which is what my aim is to do with these type of videos. Okay, so now we get to the second question regarding Ranjit. Why is the final confrontation against him done by the Warrior of Light instead of Thancred? The reason I said this is a lot simpler to cover is because it honestly boils down to gameplay reasons. Narratively, having Thancred finish him off in Amarang would have had the biggest payoff, but this would have been a bit disappointing as we encounter Ranjit multiple times throughout the story, so never getting to fight him would have been a big lost opportunity, given that he's quite a unique encounter, being the first Beastmaster type enemy we encountered. They also needed to have a major encounter during the Eulmore segment, which would have been problematic if Ranjit had died in Amarang. Of course, you could just have Thancred appear during or after the battle with Ranjit and finish him off, but I am going to assume that the writers didn't want to diminish the player's accomplishment of finally defeating Ranjit. Regardless, it's fair criticism. With that out of the way, we can move on back to the topic of the video. Sorry if that segment was a bit lengthy. I felt it was important to look at it a bit more in depth rather than simply brushing it off as, yeah, I guess they didn't want to kill off such a popular character. While those two are dealing, we get to finally see the scene where Ryne is confronting Minfilia, and the scene pretty much starts off with this.
But I want to do more than just watch and cheer. I want to make a difference. I want to help them like they helped me, and maybe even inspire others to do the same. Coming together, providing for one another. That's the only way forward I can see. Since all of our heroes are gone, we'll just have to make heroes of ourselves.
"'Tis a beautiful, wonderful dream, one we share."
Once again, it's emphasized how crucial everyone else was for Ryne's growth. As I mentioned in my last video, without people she could rely on, she would have ended up in a very dark place. In my opinion at least. This is definitely a really great scene. It's just really wholesome seeing how strong her resolve really is, and it's also the first time we start to see the real Ryne, by which I mean that we see her real personality, not the one with the mask that is having doubts about herself constantly. Minfilia even states that it's natural to hesitate and think about backing out, and it's emphasized once more that the decision must come of her own volition. But Ryne responds with this sort of a fiery resolve, let's call it. Minfilia then fully awakens Ryne's powers and departs, while telling Ryne to be herself and to inspire others.
I can track the Light Wardens now. Maybe even help you fight them.
I'm glad you're back.
You don't have to say that, you know.
But I want to. Your family. How else would I feel?
Then we must think of a new name. Suggestions?
If the lady herself has no preference, I think the honor should rightly fall to Thancred. After all they have been through together, he's practically a father to her.
Well spotted! I'm so glad you're here to explain these things.
And what exactly is that supposed to mean?
Oh, nothing.
What about Ryne?
Ah, blessing in Fae. Wait, does this mean thou wert listening when I delivered my lectures on the pixies?
Not exactly, but that one word made an impression. Of course, if it's not to your liking, I can think of something else.
Ryne. Yes, I rather like the sound of it. Thank you.
That settles it then. Welcome aboard, Ryne.
I won't let you down.
Alright, I will try my best to not gush and fanboy over this scene, but damn, it's got to be said that this is one of the best cutscenes that we see in Shadowbringers, especially since it comes right after that incredible scene we just saw. But yeah, this is basically where the big payoff comes in from all that character development during the first half of the expansion, when Ryne and Thancred reunite. And sorry that I keep bringing up metaphors, but can we talk about how excellently they are utilized here? Thancred defeated Ranjit, hence defeating everything he doesn't want to see in himself when parenting Ryne, and then he died and was reborn as a person who isn't trying to run from his past anymore. Meanwhile, Ryne confronts Minfilia, shows she's more than capable of becoming the Oracle thanks to her incredible resolve and compassion towards others. Thus, the fake Ryne dies and reappears as someone who doesn't hesitate to think for herself anymore and wants to actively help others instead of conforming and doing as she's told. And it's delivered so beautifully, with her different face traits and her finally receiving her own name so that she may become her own person. Not to mention the fact that it's Thancred who gets to choose the name, like a father to a child. And if all that wasn't enough, it even brings resolution to Minfilia. Plus, it's all mirrored, with Thancred giving Minfilia her name. Like seriously, rewatching this, I am genuinely impressed by how much they accomplish with this one short scene with such a small amount of dialogue. How well they are writing on that payoff, how much emotion is being conveyed. I apologize for gushing this much, but I just cannot understate how much I love this freaking game. Side note, the whole thing with Ryne's hair color changing, I think this is one of those meanings that get a bit lost because of us being the Western audience. Since, if I'm not mistaken, drastically changing the appearance of your hair is a lot more significant in Japan. It can sometimes be seen as a very symbolic kind of thing, but do correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm not that big on Japanese culture. I just feel like bringing this up, since for those of you that played FF9, you may recall a similar thing happening there, where Garnet cuts her hair and it's made out to be like this big deal to the audience. It's done really brilliantly, however, since even if her hair changing and eyes going back to normal don't have significance to you, they still have the whole thing with her being named by Thancred, and the importance of that should be really easily, universally understood. But yes, this is the point where both characters have, for all intents and purposes, come full circle. But as I talked about in the beginning, just because the main conflict is resolved doesn't mean that they're complete. It's more like the beginning for them now, as we get to see their relationship grow into different directions with new conflicts and hardships to overcome. I know this is very basic, and I'm sounding like I'm explaining this to a 5-year-old. It's not my intention to sound condescending, trust me. I just wish to reinforce what I talked about earlier, that having Thancred die there would have been such a massive waste, as now that both of their main conflicts have been resolved, this is basically a proverbial gold mine for the writers, since they can have their story go to so many directions and have it be flexible with the plot going forward. When covering Eden, we'll get to examine the direction that they took, so I'll skip forward a bit since they sideline both characters from this point onwards, which is a good call as the plot starts to pick up and their main character arc has been resolved. Plus, they have Eden for fleshing out their characters further, so they don't need to have them constantly hogging the spotlight in the MSQ anymore. Basically, Ryne just fights together as part of the party. She uses her awakened skills to spot light wardens, to identify that Sin Eater food in Ilmore, to reveal Watery's true identity, healing people of Ilmore by either slowing down or getting rid of the corruption within them. It's not made clear which one it is, though I personally like to think that it's the former, that the amount of Sin Eater food that they ate made it fester so deep within their bodies that it's near impossible to get rid of it completely, at least for the people that have been in the city for a long time. But it's ambiguous, so there you go. As well as slowing down the corruption within the warrior fight. Basically, she uses her unique powers to a great effect. I'm just bringing this up because I appreciate that they had her using her powers in a lot of logical ways, both minor and major, instead of having this be just a lame plot device that only gets utilized once, as that sort of thing tends to happen a lot. So it really makes the whole journey of her becoming the Oracle of Light feel a lot more rewarding, since it's actually being utilized really well. She also settles the score together with Thancred, verbally destroys Watery, improves her speech stat, is being read at by Alice, gets wrecked by Imacuttlefish like everyone else, all sorts of fun stuff, and the 5.0 portion ends with her saying farewell to you, followed by a scene of her and Thancred looking at the empty, which is basically signaling, please come to the Eden story in 2 weeks. Now, before we end the video, I would like to go off on another tangent here. Both in the last video and in this one, I brought up this point a few times about Ryne having these hardships, such as that she would have easily become lost without all the people helping her. But I just want to clarify, I don't mean to make it sound in a oh, she's a child character, therefore you should root for her sort of way. Yes, it's a lot easier to sympathize with child characters, but that doesn't mean that it's an automatic win. You still need to write them well. In Ryne's case, I would say it was a technical task from a writer's perspective, as she was not only a completely new character introduced in 5.0, but she also needed to be dynamic with Thancred's character and his story. They also needed to have her grow as naturally as possible within the amount of time they were given to make the story, given that she shares screen time with many of the major characters featured in Shadowbringers. All this while also having it flow well. The problem with child characters is that you don't want them to appear too mature and experienced, because that's just unrealistic. But you also don't want them to be overly naive and acting stupid all the time. This was something I felt was done really well with the twins, especially Alphinaud, where he grows from that annoying brat that he was when he was introduced in Realm Reborn, to slowly becoming someone who you would want at your side and rely on. Speaking of the twins, I think a big thing that helped here is that there is an interesting juxtaposition between Ryne and the twins, which I think was very much intentional. You see, they are about the same age, but you can see in the twins the things that Ryne lacked that makes her more vulnerable mentally. She doesn't have an academic background to have knowledge of the world. She didn't have a loving parent figure when growing up. She doesn't have any ties, any connections within her world. Just for reference, think back to how many times the twins, especially Alphinaud, utilized his connection throughout Realm Reborn and Heavensward. She does have special powers, yes, but this only makes her already bad situation even worse, as now she's having all this burden and responsibility shifted towards her. That's what makes it really engaging, to look at her character grow, because she starts all the way from the bottom the moment we are introduced to her in the story. This is why both the game and I in this video keep emphasizing how she has this strong resolve. It's because of her circumstances leading up to this point, and why she isn't weak, as seen by her strong resolve to go confront Minfilia here. And it's not just cause she's a child, though that is definitely a part of it. Whether you like or hate the character, it's important to at least understand the context, which is why I felt explaining myself here. Alright, there's been quite a lot in this video and it's a convenient cutoff point, so I will end the second part here. In the next part I will cover Eden's Gate and Eden's Verse. So what do you guys think of some of the things I discussed here? If it's tough to decide on things to comment, since I do cover a lot of topics in these videos, I can also leave with a question, such as, let's say, what do you think about character deaths in FF14? Do you think that characters should face consequences more often, or do you think it's fine the way it is, just cut out the fake out deaths? The reason I'm curious is because I love hearing different people's opinions on story related things. It helps me think about things from more angles, which keeps it fresh and all that fun stuff. And if you appreciate this type of content, the easiest way to stick around is to just subscribe, basically. Anyways, I have been talking for long enough, I'ma cut it out here. Have a nice day.
I am righteousness, and righteousness will prevail!
If you're righteous, why did you run?
Fucking with me 'cause I'm a teenager.